All right. So welcome from my side as well. I'm Leon Martin. I've been working in the brain simulation section for like 2 years now, a bit over 2 years now. And yeah, mainly in the domain of integrating biological knowledge in brain network models with the brain simulation framework, the virtual brain, TVB. Of which you probably heard a lot by now. And in my talk, I'm going to focus about how to make those models, or the approaches how to make those models biologically plausible, and how to integrate and aggregate all this biological knowledge that is out there, and to make meaning of it computationally, and to somehow streamline and channel this knowledge for brain simulation. All right, so the content of today's talk will be about or starting from real scratch. So what is knowledge? It's a little tour into epistemology. So what types of knowledge are there? Definitions or notions of knowledge. Because we got to know what we're talking about, what our subject is. Because the issue is how to represent this knowledge then computationally, how to teach computers and machines biological knowledge, which could be counterintuitive at the first place. So we're talking about the Semantic Web, a framework for knowledge representation in on the World Wide Web, about computational ontology, how we can define different classes and concepts in a machine readable fashion. And we're talking about knowledge graphs. What are there? And about knowledge graphs in science, in biomedical science, and more precisely in brain simulation as well. Okay, so what's the rationale behind this? So why are we talking about knowledge and computers and stuff like that? So the question is, how can we exploit the plethora of already published biomedical information out there? So we could also go onto PubMed, type in a keyword. Let's suppose we're interested in the brain, and then we just type in brain in the search box, and we get like 2 million papers, all kind of related to the brain. And you see, even if you want to be more specific and start your career in Alzheimer's research, there are also like 200 publications out there, or even more if we come to it later, if you channel or streamline your search more specifically. And if you're not the fastest reader, you won't be able to read through all those millions of publications for one domain. But there's still knowledge entailed, and you might miss something if you don't read everything systematically, which you can't. So we need kind of new approaches computationally to like encapsulate all this knowledge, to aggregate this knowledge, and to answer the question, what is there out there? What knowledge about existing concepts do we have, and how can we access it? And yeah, more specifically, how can we use then this knowledge out there? How can we aggregate information from millions of articles to inform brain models, to generate biologically plausible dynamical models of the brain? And that's the question. So you might have come across this slide from our first session of the summer school from Petra Ritter. So this is like showing all those data modalities that could be used for individualized brain models. So we have multiple spatial scales and multiple temporal scales, and each of the data modality has its own methodology, its own experts, its own terminology, its own data structure to talk about. So how can we unify this, and how can we compare different scales? How can we link data from different concepts and modalities to each other, because they're all representing concepts of biology, basically. How can we integrate molecular pathways with data from physiological recordings, for example? And how can like researchers from different domains communicate with each other to tackle the same concept, basically? Or how can we systematically on a computationally access data describing the same concept on different scales? So we have heterogeneous brain data. We have a variety of data sources and multiple spatial and temporal scales. So the question is, how can we unify those different concepts and bridging the mathematics and biology? And therefore, we need kind of a unified framework. We need a concept that is that makes this knowledge on those different scales accessible. But let's start from scratch. What is knowledge? There's some noises out there. You can mute yourself. Great. Or is it? All right. Try it out. Okay. So we're taking a little tour through epistemology. So epistemology is basically reasoning about knowledge. So it comes from a Greek word. This is kind of distracting. So I think it's
try to okay. Where it comes from. Sorry.
Could you mute the person, Leon? That would be super great. Opeyeni? Ah, great. Now it's gone. Sorry about that. Okay, so the epistemology is kind of the school behind like talking about knowledge, basically. So from ancient history, people were interested about what is to know, how can we describe knowledge, what is knowledge, how is knowledge good, and then the question arises: what are the operations of human understanding? So how kind of early cognitive psychology, basically. What are the preconditions of the possibility of human understanding? Those questions. So how can humans formalize knowledge? How can humans generate knowledge and retrieve knowledge? And or even how can modern science be justified by appeal to sensory experience? How can knowledge be justified by science or scientific methods, basically? So the question is, what is knowledge? And first thing, you Google knowledge, and you come to different definitions. So it's a kind of epistemological quality of cognitive success. So how cognitions are formed or memories are formed, basically, and you can translate knowledge back to Latin to two words, cognitio or scientia. So you see, so you can translate it back and then distribute it to two fields, like one in psychology and one into science, basically. So if you then look it up in the dictionary, knowledge is an understanding of or information about a subject that you get by experience or study, either known by one person or by people or a group in general. And everybody denies it, but the first thing you look into is Wikipedia. So I print this definition as well. So knowledge is a familiarity or awareness of someone or something, such as facts, skills, or objects, often contributing to understanding. So you have different qualities of these definitions. So we have kind of different types of knowledge, different qualities, and but it's also linked to understanding, to meaning, basically. And one of the first definitions by Plato is like a true belief accompanied by rational account. And we are coming to that definition later as well. But first of all, what types of knowledge are out there? This is probably not an exhaustive categorization, but we have at least 4 different qualities of knowledge. We have knowing how, like different skill sets, like to ride a bike, or in neuroscience to use an MRI scanner. So there's specific skills you can acquire. We have knowing that, also like known as propositional knowledge. This could be like the proper scientific knowledge. It's knowledge about facts. So I know that X is P. And we have knowledge by acquaintance. So I know the taste of chocolate, I've experienced it. I now know my neighbor because I met him. And we have this kind of different quality of that, the phenomenal or phenomenological knowledge. So I know what it's like to have a taste chocolate or pizza Hawaii. So I have like the phenomenological quality also stored in my memory. So I know what it's like. So it's a different thing, but it's intertwined, because you have to first have the acquaintance and then your emotional reaction to that. So it's a different quality, so therefore a different kind of knowledge. So as you see, like probably for our approach, knowing how and especially knowing that is the main focus of the talk. So the propositional knowledge, how we can store facts, how we can acquire facts, and what are the necessary and sufficient conditions for knowing facts. So the definition from Plato, which I read to you in the first slides, it's kind of the so-called tripartite definition. So S knows that P, if and only if P is true, so there's a direct necessary truth condition, and truth is, but rather a metaphysical, not an epistemological notion. So truth is a matter of how things are, not how they can be shown to be. So we say that only true things can be known. We're not yet saying anything about how anyone can access the truth. All right, so the second notion is as believes that P. So in order to know some things, you first have to build your hypotheses, your beliefs for that. And as is justified in believing that P. So you need kind of a reason why you believe P. And it became something of a convenient fiction to suppose that this analysis was kind of widely accepted throughout the history of philosophy. In fact, this kind of justified true belief analysis was pretty early attacked, because there are some cases in which it's not sufficient to have only those three conditions, which have been formalized in some cases from Edmund Gettier. And he says that justified true belief is possible without knowledge. It could be that we have a justified belief that is true only as a result of luck. And for example, one problem that is formalized is, imagine you are walking down the street and there's a field next to you, and you look across the field and you see farther away that there's a sheep in the field. So you have a belief, there's a sheep, and it's kind of justified because your belief is based on your visual perception. If you go then nearer to that object, you realize it is not a sheep, but it's a rock that is shaped like a sheep. However, when you look behind that rock, you find an actual sheep. So was your initial belief there is a sheep in the field knowledge because it was justified and true, in fact, because there was a sheep in the field, but it was hidden behind the sheep-shaped rock. And yeah, by your intuition, you would say that this kind of knowledge, there's a sheep in the field, is not, it is not knowledge, basically, because it's pure luck that there happens to be a sheep behind that rock. You mistakenly thought it was a sheep. Okay, maybe we can go into this in the discussion a bit further. There are other cases we can speak about. But yeah, for matter of time, I will not really go into detail. But you can also always write the questions into the chat if you have any objections to that view. Okay, so if those justified true beliefs are not sufficient for knowledge, there has to be something more. So, in further progress of epistemological thought, things were added, conditions were added to make this this notion sufficient again. So there's one thread of thought which is the addition of no false lemmas. So a lemma is a kind of intermediate or subsidiary theorem in an argument or proof. So if we have justified true belief and as did not infer that P from anything false, this could be knowledge. So if we going back to the sheep in the field, we inferred that there was a sheep from a false condition, from a false perception or misperception, and therefore it was not knowledge when we said there's a sheep in the field. So if we have this kind of diagram here, so we have justified true beliefs, and that entail justified true beliefs that weren't inferred from anything false. But is this knowledge? Probably there are some cases in which this doesn't hold true. So there's one example, the so-called fake barn county. So imagine there was a fake barn county where the locals create fake barns that look completely identical to real barns, but are not, like just the first wall. And like Henry or Henriette is driving through this fake barn county, but she doesn't know the locals do like build fake barns. So she often thinks, there's a barn, when she looks at those fake barns while driving by. And these beliefs are not knowledge because they are not true. The barns are fake. Yeah. So the justified true belief notion holds, but there are false lemmas. So it's inferred from a false perception because the barns are not true. And however, if you then drive by one real barn, Henriette is looking at this barn and thinks there's a barn. And this time the belief is true and also justified because the visual perception of the barn is clearly indicating there's a real barn. And it is not inferred from anything false. But is this knowledge? And you can, like, in the back of your head, can like think of like analogies in science. Is this then real knowledge if you like happen to come across the one real barn in a field of fake barns? So maybe that's not knowledge. And this was kind of tried, or it was tried to tackle the fake barn problem with the so-called reliabilism. So it is changing the notion as beliefs P because it's justified, and it's changed by, it is caused by a reliable method. And this is a cool train of thought because the only justification is kind of the method. So you need no cognitive resource, or the advantage of this is, what I mean is that children or animals can also have knowledge. They probably can't justify it, but they have a reliable method, in this case kind of visual perception, that the belief is true. So for example, if you have good eyesight, this is a reliable method of believing your perceptions. But this doesn't really tackle the fake barn county problem, because even if you have a reliable method, there's a probability that your perception is false. And there's then still the luck part that drives you into believing that there is a real barn. So in like a kind of modern epistemology, this justified true belief plus X notion was then redefined. So there's a school called virtue as epistemology. I won't go into detail about it because it's not the basic philosophy course here, but it's kind of interesting because this thought is in parallel to the moral virtue. So it is an act is only morally virtue if the intention is good and the act succeeded in being good. So if you try to help an elderly person across the street, this is a good intention, I would say. But if you like push the elderly across the street and stop all cars, and the elderly person didn't want to go over the street, it was just waiting at the street for the bus, then it was not a good act because it didn't succeed. So there's interdependence between the intention and the result of your acts, and this is then transferred into like this definition of knowledge. So knowledge is also a belief arising from acts of intellectual virtue. So the justification condition entails the truth condition. Knowledge is a belief that is justified and truth. So we're teaching the truth through certain virtuous motive acts, and this is immune to get your objections because there could be no luck. So it has to be a reliable method and in the same time truth. And so this is theoretical, and a definition of knowledge we might not need for our practical session or for in science, because we need kind of a reliable method and we need a way to get to the truth condition. So let's see what biological knowledge on how this can be defined with this justified true belief notion. So biological knowledge is a matter of accepting true biological hypotheses on the basis of strong evidence that establishes the hypothesis as the best explanation of various biological phenomena. So we have like this belief, a biological hypothesis, and we have strong evidence. So it's through a justified belief, or rather a really reliable method, and we're accepting it as the truth. So it's still a bit tricky to answer the questions: how close to complete does this explanation have to be in order to be known to be true? So how close can we get to the truth? And if you go in the direction of Karl Popper and this science philosophy, and then we can't really get to the truth. We can just only like rule out false hypotheses. We can also only falsify, but not truthify conditions. But still, we need a kind of a practical definition of knowledge. So we can also answer the question: what is the relationship between biological knowledge and understanding? And can one truly appreciate truth in biology with only theoretical knowledge, or does one also need to know how to use various biological models? And how can we use biological models to approximate the biological truth? Let's discuss those questions now further in the talk. And you see also in the domain of biological knowledge, there are various different scales and various different subdomains, basically. So we have diseases, we have different biological targets, we have drugs, we have functions. So we have a time scale as well. We have pathways, locations, chemicals, so all the different spatial scales as well. And how can we connect this knowledge, and how can we represent this knowledge in a computational way? So this is the question of this part of the talk now. We have like multiple data points that are already generated all across the web. And this is all published data. But the question is, how can we know that this data point is about dogs? This is knowledge about dogs. And that data point over here, it has knowledge about a Labradoodle or a Bull Terrier. So how can we know that this knowledge is also about dogs? Because a Bull Terrier is a kind of a dog. So we need kind of a describing metadata layer that makes it possible to link those data points in a network of databases or information to be about the same concept, about the same entity, in this case dogs. And if we're interested in dogs, we want to know all the possible knowledge. We want to build a so-called expert system. So we want to aggregate all the knowledge that is out there on the dogs, and therefore we need information about meaning of the data that is out there. And with that, we can link all those databases about dogs to get the most profound and most exhaustive knowledge that is out there about dogs. And the same is with any biological concept, basically. And this was initially proposed by one of the founders of the World Wide Web, of the internet, Tim Berners-Lee, in a Scientific American article in 2001, which states that it is essential to redefine the internet, like the World Wide Web 3.0, that there is a universality, which is an essential property of the World Wide Web. So anything must be able to link to anything. So we need representation of the web that can be like uploaded, basically. So we can't like just put physical things out there. So we need kind of representations that are linkable to others. So we need a way to link Bull Terrier, the class or information about that, to information about dogs in general. So anything must be able to put on the web, and the information vary along many axes. So we have multi-dimensional data, and so right, or as it was, information was put on the web for humans to read. So it's with hypertext we can link documents with each other, but this was not in a meaningful way. It's just basically a library on steroids. So we don't have to pull out each book in separate. We just click on hypertext links and get referred to the next book. But with that, we do not really know what the meaning about those links is, and what the meaning about the documents, what they mean. And therefore, we need a web that is machine readable and for human consumptions. So we have the scale between like poetry, which is only for humans, and like raw databases, which are primarily for machines. But we need data with well-defined meaning to be exchanged in the semantic web. So this is like from the original text: computers and people work side by side in cooperation. And this kind of was not intended for science, but intended for the whole web. So for getting doctor's appointments in a way that the agent or the computer knows where the person lives and what are the insurance parameters, and which hospital you can go to and stuff like that, and what are your appointments at this day. So this was rather the example in this article, but linked And machine and human readable data proposes a really good way for scientific knowledge and how it is produced and shared. So there are 4 key components of the semantic web. The first thing is what I've talked about already a lot, is semantics. So how is meaning expressed, and how can we encode meaning inside a document or a web page, so we can enable knowing without artificial intelligence. So usually, if you want to kind of aggregate that, or if you want to classify this web page being about dogs, is that you kind of cluster all the web pages based on their content, and then you have a cluster that that has a huge amount of images about dogs on their documents, and therefore this is then the dog cluster. But imagine you just have one website, and there is in the semantic layer encoded that this website is about the class dogs. Then you don't have to use like machine learning or artificial intelligence. There is like inherently knowledge then linked. So the second concept is knowledge representation. Computers need access to structured collections of information, and besides that, a set of logical rules for automated reasoning. All those databases that are publicly available on the internet, they are uncentralized. You don't have just one general database of dogs. So we need also a unified language to express this data and the rules, because how the one database, like the official European database of dogs, is okay. I gotta change my analogy now. Saying two of dogs, but there you get the point. So you have 2 different databases that are completely structured in a completely different manner, but they are about the same concept. So there has to be a unified language to express this data structure and the rules how this data structure is formalized. And therefore, there are 3 different technologies. The first thing is a universal resource identifier, which is uniquely pointing towards a concept in a database. Then we need an extensible markup language, which is basically formalizing the syntax of the structured documents. And we need a resource description framework, which encodes the meaning in the syntax. What those things are, we're going to get to in a little bit later, but I hope you get the point. So we don't need everything in the same place. We just need a set of formalized rules and definitions to make those uncentralized data points accessible and available. And therefore, we need kind of like systematized technologies for this semantic layer. Those set of rules and this systematization can be done with so-called ontologies. So they define a concept or classes and links its identifiers of those concepts from different databases. So we define the concept gene, and we define the concept maybe brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF, as a subclass of the concept gene, and we link this BDNF with an universal resource identifier with a URI. And then all the databases that store information about this specific gene, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, can link it to the URI. And even if they have different URIs, we can use ontologies to say this URI, this gene has following URIs in those databases. And then we have kind of a meta level that is also, again, defining and aggregating information about a concept and is kind of unifying different terminologies, unifying different identifiers. We can also assign different properties to classes. So we can say, as in my example, we can say, okay, gene is a concept and it has subclasses. There are different instances of the class gene. And we have RNA and smaller particles of a gene. We have amino acids. It's part of a gene or something like that. And so we can allow that subclasses also inherit properties. And for example, oh, okay, I'm leaning myself wide out of the window here, but this particular gene is part of a human, and we have the subclasses. The subclass, this amino acid is part of the gene, and therefore the property of this gene is part of the human gets inherited to the subclass because of those logical rules we taught the computer. So we say if gene A or gene B, D, and F is part of a human, this amino acid the gene is made of is also part of the human, and can be seen in humans, for example. So that's basically the framework of ontologies. And we have agents. So agents are tools that collect and process web content or data content or information from diverse sources and exchange those results with other programs. And by that, those agents can build a shared understanding by exchanging those ontologies versus a heavy standardization. So we don't need everything at the same place. We just need metadata layers or semantic layers aggregating the information or aggregating the identifiers about one concept. Say, okay, all those different identifiers point towards the same concept, and this is defined in an ontology. So we don't need to standardize all the terminology. We just have to, we need agents that know that this term is equivalent to that term. Okay. I think I'll leave it like here. I take a lot of time explaining those basic concepts. If there are any questions left, then please just type them into the chat or something. All right. So how can we represent this knowledge inside the semantic web? I already talked about like those documents. They're raw documents in a specific format, and we can use so-called entity highlighting or entity recognition software to link data points or set of strings or values to define concepts in the so-called semantic layer. And with that, we can systemize all this global knowledge that is out there into a so-called knowledge graph. So we can link data points based on their meaning with each other. So we can really teach a software tool or a computer that this data is about the BDNF gene. And the BDNF gene has that synonym, and therefore that database is also about the BDNF gene, about brain-derived neurotrophic factors, for example. So the question is then, how can we get from data to knowledge? And this I already talked about, but maybe to make it a bit more clearer. So data are the raw alphanumeric values. It's just numbers or strings that are obtained through different methods. So data in the simplest form consists of just raw and uninterpretable values. Information is then created if you process the data. You can organize it, you can structure it, you can provide context and meaning, and yeah, therefore information is basically just processed data. And knowledge is then added with meaning. So it is what we know. It is unique to each agent, and it is the accumulation of past experience and insight that shapes the lens by which we interpret and assign new meaning to new information. And we need kind of this knowledge this integrative nomological network, basically. And we need kind of an authoritative capacity, a set of rules we can base our decision making on. And this knowledge is actionable then. We can infer new links, we can infer new knowledge based on past experience and the processed information we gathered from new data sets. And then we can store the knowledge. So we can store it as semantic metadata, like of literature basically, that preserves this knowledge. And we can build a knowledge graph as a semantically linked database, because we know what the meaning of our data is, we know the concepts behind our data, so we can link other data points, other databases even, to the same concept.
Hi, Leon, it's Julie. You have a question in the chat.
Yeah, thanks.
From
yes. So the question is, does knowledge show emergence properties? I understand it in that way that it has properties to build new knowledge, or to not only represent the data but generate new data, basically, right? Or new entities or concepts. Then, if I understand it that way, then yes, because we have a complex graph of different data points that are annotated with meaning. We can use the set of logical rules defined in an ontology to logically infer new links. So in the most rudimentary way is this example with the amino acid in the gene. If it happened that nobody has investigated the existence of that particular protein or amino acid in humans, but many have investigated that this gene is expressing a specific protein, then if you link this in a one graph, you can logically infer that this protein that the gene expresses must be existent or should be existent in a human, and I would say that is an emergent property then, because there's a new link. I mean, it's intuitive for us, but for a computer, it is not really intuitive. If there is no data out there to generate kind of this link based on logical inference, so I would say that there is an emergent property in knowledge. Yeah. All right. No, I can't switch my. I'm back. Okay. So as a little summary, there is this hierarchy of data, information, knowledge. The data is just a number of symbols, and it's only meaningful to a specific program that reads this data. But if we have a form of abstraction, if we annotate data with meaning, so with semantic data and texts and database records, so this information is then both meaningful to humans and machines, and we have this knowledge, which is the highest level of abstraction, and which is encoded in some form of this inside, or in some form inside this information. The traditional information systems we talk about, like databases and stuff like that, lack those kinds of intelligence because they process the data without analyzing the knowledge behind that. They process the data without connecting it to a predefined concept class, and with that concept class connection, all the logical formalized rules that apply to that concept are also projected to the data. And if we make that connection, we have this kind of intelligent information system with the ability to process knowledge and to gain new insights based on already existed structured data. And this is also called a knowledge-based system. But this is, like, in theory, super cool. And I mentioned Tim Berners-Lee and his article in 2001. And that was the vision from the start, like directly from the beginning, or from the child shoes of the internet, to have everything linked to meaning. But it took really long to like implement this thought, to implement this theory, or it took really long to see the benefits of having everything linked with meaning, with semantics. I mean, this is basically that there is a reason, I would say. So there's a reason, because now data storage is getting less and less expensive. So we have more capabilities to store huge amounts of data. And now we are losing track of all the data that is out there. And therefore we need a set of tools to combine and aggregate to at least search for that data. Yeah, imagine you have different fields of biology, like molecular biology and systems biology or something like that, and they are investigating the same concept, but are completely talking in a different language. They have different terminology for the same concept, and a different perspective on that, like bottom up or top down or something like that. And this data about the same concept is stored in completely different locations and completely different fields of research. And if you don't have this kind of semantic connection, you won't have the ability to combine those information and to generate a more consistent and a more comprehensive knowledge graph or knowledge tool set. So we need kind of a good knowledge engineering, so teaching machines biological knowledge. We have kind of knowledge that is stored in millions of scientific articles and databases. And we have the meaning of content, which is basically semantics. So we need kind of a definition of the word that must be recorded in a controlled vocabulary. We had that like discussed already. But we also have to answer the question, what is the connection between the different words and semantic entities? How are those biomedical classes connected, and how can we interlink all these things? So we first got to teach the machine a specific vocabulary, a specific semantic, but we also need kind of a syntax to combine this semantic. But first, how we define concept, and therefore we need kind of a controlled vocabulary. This is clear. So, and in the most basic way, we need a vocabulary that like consists of several languages, or like a dictionary or something like that. We need to know that like Niere is renal or something like that. So, but this goes further to synonyms or acronyms or specific terminologies to specific domains of research. So the controlled vocabulary is an organized arrangement of words and phrases used to index content and to retrieve content through search mechanisms. It typically includes preferred and variant terms, by what I've talked about, and has a defined scope or describes a specific domain. So we need a set of, so in this example, really basic. So we have this preferred term, renal insufficiency, which is a unique identifier. And we need an entity recognition that only works if your controlled vocabulary is good to recognize that renal failure also leads to the concept of renal insufficiency. And for example, decreased renal function is also linked to the concept renal insufficiency. So there is super much literature out there about this kind of controlled vocabularies. There for each domain, there are tons of resources for like trying to systematize and standardize the vocabulary of one research domain. And this increases the sensitivity and specificity of those searches. So imagine you as I in the beginning said, imagine you just searching for Alzheimer's and for the string, then your search algorithm is only looking for the string with the apostrophe and the s. But there are Alzheimer literature that is like saying, okay, Alzheimer disease or Alzheimer dementia, or they are just using the widely used acronym AD. And in order to find all those publications that are all about the same concept, but using a different terminology, we need this controlled vocabulary. Yes, and that's the reason behind that. But we have to go a step further. How are those concept links logically? And therefore we can make use of ontology, also a school in philosophy, or a way of thinking in philosophy. So it's about the being, what it is, and basically the study of being. So what is there? What is the nature of existence? What is a human? So basically those things, what different species are out there? What are physical parts more real than immaterial concepts like thoughts? And it's about the nature of existence and the definition of this nature of existence. In computational ontology, this is a bit more used in a narrow sense, but you can also see the parallels. It's a description of what exists in a particular domain. So it's a representation of a shared, agreed, and detailed model or set of concepts of a certain problem and domain. So we have a data model, or basically a metadata model of a particular knowledge domain, describing all the possible components and features as well as their relationships. This is the set of rules I was talking about. So it's kind of a rule set or a formalization of all the possible compartments of knowledge. But let's make this clear. So we're still not having any data. So it's just a generalized model about the possible combination and the possible relationships between different biomedical entities in that case. So between the different classes. And for this relationship representation, we need a framework that is computationally readable, basically. So this is the so-called resource description framework I was talking about earlier. It's this World Wide Web consortium in which Tim Berners-Lee is also active. And it was originally designed as a metadata model. So it's about representation of information in the web. And it is now used as a general method for describing graph data. And it is the foundation that is used in more complex languages for web-based ontologies like OL or SOS. And you find it everywhere where graphs are. So every graph can be like transformed in this format of subject, predicate, object, basically. So this is the core structure and so-called abstract syntax. This so-called set of triplets. So we have two nodes connected with one relationship. So a basic syntax of a sentence as well. So subject linked with a predicate to an object. And if you can imagine, this is like the smallest graph that is possible. But you can link any amount of entities with relationships. So each entity can be a subject or an object. And with our ontologies, we can also annotate properties to those entities and relationships as well. So we can have a really huge representation system of knowledge in a specific domain. This graph is a bit bigger, but you understand the concept, right? So we have different subjects that can be also objects. So in this case, father is in relationship with a mother. That's kind of heteronormative, but It could be also mother and mother, and father, you know, the name. And they are in a relationship and gave birth to a child. And all those subjects here are persons. And this can be then added on top of each other to build a really complex representation with many relationships and different classes of entities. So we have this computational ontology, which is a semantic data model that defines the type of things that exist in a domain and the properties that can be used to describe them. So we have those three main components. We have classes, we have relationships, so the predicates between the classes, and we have attributes. So we can annotate each class and each relationship with certain attributes. So for example, the class book could have the attribute number of pages, or like language, or title. So it's a generalized data model without individual instances. So yeah, so we have the class book and the attribute title, and an instance of the attribute title could be then Harry Potter or something like that. So we have a semantic network, and this ontology is a graph with this resource description framework. And yeah, as I said, this can be defined with arbitrary precision. And maybe now it's clear to you what the difference between ontology, for example, and taxonomy is. We have higher level of complexity information about the relationships and not only about the hierarchy. And the relationship can also depend on the context. And it's a way of understanding of metadata and organization. The taxonomy, on the other hand, is just a hierarchical relationship within a category. And it has only one dimension. And yeah, it cannot represent the relationships across different domains. So each subclass is then inside the superclass. And then within an ontology, a subclass can belong to several superclasses and have itself subclasses, and which can then be interlinked with basically anything in your formalized set of within the range of the formalized set of rules you have. That's like all about the nature of ontologies on computational ontologies, because my colleague Konstantin Bülow had held a super great talk about ontologies and their importance for brain modeling last year. And you can access the video from our Brain Modes YouTube, or with this QR code as well. So that's enough from my side here. I would just quickly show you like the three ontologies, or four ontologies we use the most in our research, just to present them to you. So ontologies for neuroscience are about understanding of brain organization and using it for multiple spatial scales, and to unifying the brain concepts describing the functional or structural organization principles of the brain. We have a heterogeneity of data produced in each domain, and the rationale behind those neuroscience ontologies are bridging those data resources and unifying the concepts without like the need for a 100% standardization. So that's this cartoon I didn't find, but like we have, if there would be like 15 ontologies out there describing genes, and people are saying, oh no, we need to standardize it, then they're making a standardized ontologies, and then there are like 16 ontologies out there describing genes. So there's this problem of this infinite regress of the need of 100% standardization on that level. But for sure, you need to unify the concepts. You need a way of standardization, and that could be in this semantic metadata level. You could use so-called cross-referencing and to link different identifiers as equal, for example. And therefore, there could be different taxonomies and different nomenclatures. There could be different identifiers existing in parallel if they are somehow semantically linked with each other and to be interchangeable, basically, to be synonymous of. And that's what most of or all the ontologies I'm presenting now are doing as well. So, for example, the Uberon Anatomical Ontology, which is a multi-species ontology that is defining basically all of the anatomical compartments of a living species, ranging from fruit flies to humans. And as you can see here, we have a definition of the hippocampal formation, which is part of the subicular complex, which is part of the cerebral cortex, and we have also different links to different species and stuff like that. So it's a really complex ontology of anatomy. And we have this then hippocampal formation, which has an ID and a URI. And this is linked to other ontologies to be equal. So we have different ontologies, different nomenclatures, but they are interlinked to point at the same concept. And we have the properties of this class with the definition nodes, and we have this kind of aspect of controlled vocabulary inside this ontology as well, because we have also the definition of synonyms and acronyms and broader and finer defined synonyms. You could basically have this with arbitrary complexity. And another ontology, which is rather a controlled vocabulary, but is also interlinked, is the medical subject headings, which is which is listing all the concepts from PubMed as well. So it's defining biomedical concepts with great precision, and it's placing it into a hierarchy of terms. It is also linking to concepts and has this URI and definitions and a huge set of synonyms. And because this would be rather a controlled vocabulary or rather a taxonomy, but you have also the link to similar properties or to similar classes in this case. So it is an ontology or a knowledge graph as well, because Alzheimer's disease is linked to amyloid beta peptides. So there is kind of knowledge added to formalize vocabulary. Then we have the Hugo gene nomenclature, which is responsible for approving unique symbols and names for human loci, including protein coding genes, RNA genes, pseudogenes, and it is the rationale to allow to disambiguate scientific communication about genes, basically. So it has over 43,000 symbols, entailing 19,000 protein coding genes, and if there could be new symbols requested by journals like Nature Genetics or different databases, if there's a need for addition. And we have also here the approved symbol, the gene name, and more attributes of that. The last ontology I want to show you quickly is the gene ontology, which is presumably the largest ontology I'm aware of, at least in the biomedical field, which is defining over 45,000 classes of genes and hundreds of thousands relationships to each other. And it has the ontology, the annotation, and it has also knowledge about it. And this are also tools for example, gene set enrichment. So you can input genes and you can get out all the biological processes that are associated with the gene. It's massive. So I won't go into detail. I think Konstantin talked about that a bit longer. But yeah, it provides a structured computable knowledge regarding the functions of genes and genes products. And yeah, it should be, or I think the rationale behind it is to develop a comprehensive model of biological systems ranging across different scales. All right, as you've seen probably, my definitions of ontologies, taxonomies, and all those things can't be directly applied to all those resources I've shown you. So most of those resources are combining ontologies and data, because a formalized set of rules is nice, but yeah, it's I will come to that. So like here you can find those ontologies like BioPortal and OLS. There are like thousands of ontologies listed, and you can look for your specific domain and you probably will find one. But yeah, as I said, there's also data link, because it's no use to have like this really well structured generalized data model, but you don't link it with data. So the question could be arise, why those things? So why computational semantics? Why using it? So we have this rules that could be taught to machines, and we could use it for inferencing missing links, but you could also go into your ontologies and add those missing links. But if the complexity gets too high, then you need this definition of rules. It's about if you have like 40,000 different genes you want to relate to each other based on literature evidence, for example, based on data, you need at first a set of rules how you can relate this. So is gene part of that class or something, or like that biological process, can this specific biological process be linked to genes or not, or something like that. So you need this possibility for links defined in an ontology, and then you can link data to the concepts. And that's the cool thing, and that's where the magic happens then. But at first, you need this really great set of rules and approach of unifying concepts, and not only looking at terms, but really behind the concept, or the concept behind, that is like in this semantic meta layer. So linking this semantics to data is also really great for fair data management, because maybe as a wrap up, you need like findable data with descriptive metadata. Otherwise you won't find data you're looking for. It should be accessible, so you need kind of ways to access publicly available databases. You need interoperable data, so it needs to have properties to be integrated with other data sets and to be interoperable with applications or different workflows. And you need reusable data, so it should be well described so that you can use, combine, and extend it in different settings to generate new knowledge based on old data. So this has become really important, because we can store basically everything. We can store so much data, and you obviously need to be consistent with current GDPR rules and stuff like that, but we want to reuse and make data not only efficient, but also economically like accessible or efficient. And therefore we could use those semantics for a fair data management. And especially for the findability, you can imagine that if you have data annotated with a concept rather than with just a search term, your data is way more present and findable. So for interoperability, it's also great, because you have a a set of rules the data is structured. And even if it's in a different format, you have this abstract set of rules which could be used for reformatting the data. For reusability also, so we can also have an ontology of methods, even if your methodology has a different nomenclature, the concept of what your method is acquiring could be used for this full disclosure of methodology. So it is really an important feature to have the semantics for fair data, not only for this computational linguistic side, but also to have a really interoperable metadata management structure and yeah, a unified one. And that could be achieved with a so-called knowledge graph. I think we could use a little break, right? Like 7 minutes or something like that. Or should we go on? I don't know. I think a break was promised, right?
A break was planned, but I think you might be already over the time. So
completely over the time, yes.
I would suggest to skip the break, to be honest.
Are you still with us? Okay. Either everybody like is not with us anymore, or everybody has no objections against going on. So I will continue. All right, we have this knowledge graphs. So it's gonna be like really theoretical, and I might miss those slides where we go into practice, or at least where we show projects that is using this. But no worries, the Konstantin in the next session, I guess, is also talking about this. And you heard already approaches that is using this framework in Leon Stefanovsky's talk. So bear with me. Now we are talking about knowledge graphs, because now we are like finally adding data to our ontologies. We're now adding like those things we're interested in to our ontology. And then we can formalize a so-called knowledge graph, which is a human and machine readable representation of a knowledge domain. This could be also seen as a really well annotated data set described with a formalized metadata model, which links to specific concepts from ontologies. So for example, if you have brain data and this is parcellated, then you can link your region of interest to a well-defined anatomical concept of the Uberon ontology, for example. And if you want to know, or if you want to search then data in the knowledge graph that is also about your region of interest, you can also search for the concept, and you don't have to care about the parcellation. Is it parcellated, or is it dense data that has this is formulated in that anatomical region? So you don't have to care about that anymore. You don't have to do like 20 searches. You just can search for this specific anatomical class you're interested in and get your brain data from it. So the knowledge graphs represent process data, which is linked to semantic metadata. For example, literature evidence. So you could have like raw data sets, brain data, which is really well semantically annotated, but you can also link to like literature documents, to scientific articles, which are also annotated with classes from the ontologies. So we have a knowledge graph that is a thing, not a string. So it's representing about knowledge about real-world objects and real-world connections. And each object inside this knowledge graph is represented by a distinct and defined semantic entity with a distinct URI. So words can have multiple meanings, and this example should have been way earlier, I would say. So, but here again, so words can have multiple meanings. So for example, here Taj Mahal could be the monument or the musician. And if you have an ontology, for example, the ontology of monuments, that is listing the Taj Mahal under is a subclass of monument, then we have this object, and we know, because it's a subclass of monument, we know that this is about building and not about musician, because there is also the International Ontology of Musicians, which is listing Taj Mahal as a subclass of blues musician. And so therefore we can like disambiguate and like rule out the identity between the two strings. For the knowledge graphs in neuroscience, we can use them as a multi-data source metadata management. So for example, like 35% of the data is health related and 80% of this data is unstructured. You won't, I might say that you won't like to dig through all this data manually and making use of it. So if you're using ontologies and if you annotate your data directly using ontologies, we have shared semantics and a foundation for a fair data and knowledge share that is interoperable. We can also use, on the other hand, text mining scientific literature to combine this knowledge of data with already published metadata descriptions of datasets that are not published. And so we can extract disease mechanisms and combine them with your patient level data, for example, for knowledge-based personalized medicine. So you don't need a dataset behind a knowledge graph. You could also extract entities and their relationships directly from the literature, which is also kind of a profound way of describing datasets, if you see so. So you could also use kind of text mining as a semantic meta-analysis approach. And that's what is here. So we have textual information about data, and we can extract the entities and the relationships between those entities directly from the literature, from the textual information. We can normalize it then with ontologies and compare it with experimental data, or like build pathway databases, or compare it with pathway databases, or with your proprietary databases. So like patient data or something like that, you can share publicly on the internet. So we have like unstructured information mining, then we have knowledge graph technologies, then we can combine data knowledge into models, and then as a result, we can draw actionable insights and new decisions, or we can build new hypotheses that could be tested with our data, or even with data already available. So that's a lot to process, but imagine you text mine a lot of resources of articles, and you annotate them with concepts of your ontology. Then you have rules of relationships, and you can logically infer new relationships between entities based on your formalized set of rules. And because you know all the entities and the possible relationship you can infer, you can search for those entities in a database that is annotated with those concepts to test this hypothesized relationship you inferred logically from your ontology. So this is pretty cool, I would say. And how this works, Konstantin will probably explain you. But let's see. All right, here's a question. How can we manage the multi-data of knowledge graphs in neuroscience, and how can we add and edit data into our ontology? Okay, this is the question twice. So how can we manage the multi-data of knowledge graphs? Yeah, so you need to really carefully annotate your data with a metadata scheme. So I will come to that. So for example, in the eBrains knowledge graph, each data set has to be annotated with tons of information to be integrated in that kind of knowledge graph, to be integrated in that complex network of concepts, and to that each concept can link then back to the data set. So there is still a need for manual curation. I mean, as I said with the text mining, there are means of algorithmically or like computationally extract entities of a data set, but this is only possible if the data is in some kind of process. I mean, so if you have a data set with like nifty data, so then you could probably infer based on like your rules that nifty data is about brains. But yeah, so then we can at least annotate it automatically with the concept brain, because this is a specific data format for brain data. So there are methods for kind of automatically annotate the data to be integrated in such kind of knowledge graphs, but there still has to be at least some manual creation. And the better the data is annotated, the more exhaustively all those concepts that are linked to the data set are integrated into a knowledge graph, the better the data is then findable in the end. And how can we add and edit data in our ontology? So yeah, there I would suggest to watch Konstantin's talk about ontologies, because there is also a part about how ontologies are created. And but basically, this is just a set of those subject, predicate, object triplets. It's just a huge list that is linking that data to that concept, and that concept to that subclass. And it's basically just a list of those triplets, a huge one. And if you have a really huge list of triplets, then you have this kind of really complex graph. You can see here, for example, with NeuroMSIG. This is a literature-based knowledge graph generated by the Fraunhofer Institute, which is aggregating all the existing knowledge that is preserved in the scientific literature about neurodegenerative diseases. And it's building a knowledge-based model of molecular disease pathways. This is coded using biological expression language, which is basically a sophisticated RDF protocol that is linking biological entities with a certain relationship to each other. For example, this gene is linked to that biological process. So BDNF, my favorite gene, is linked to the biological process defined in Go, the gene ontology, which is called regulation of dendritic cell dendrite assembly. And this gene BDNF is defined in the U gene nomenclature. Then you see why it's so important to have those ontologies, because now we know how this gene is defined. Now we know the concept behind it. Now we know all the synonyms, and we can interchange it. And this is kind of the knowledge graph, because we have ontologies defining those rules of biological entities, and now we're adding literature data. So, for example, this could be increasing the regulation of the dendrite cell assembly, because it's a brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And all those links, this is like inhibiting, and the errors are increasing, or the positive correlation, negative correlation. So there could be multiple different biological relationships that can describe the relationship between those biological entities defined in another ontology. So this is NeuroMSIG, and the aim is like a mechanism-based nosology for disease classification based on biological pathway knowledge. It has like tons of proteins, abundances of proteins, biological processes, complexes of different genes and proteins, genes, pathologies, diseases. And yeah, this is like the biological expression knowledge. As you can see, you have the subject, predicate, object, and this is like chemical compounds, for example, biological processes, and those could be also then defined as an abundance or a biological process, or as a protein or a chemical. So this is kind of the subject properties are formulated in this description framework. So this is kind of an externalized property that can be directly then be written in this in this statement. This is called biological expression language. I'm really sorry, I forgot to add it here, but we have so many things to talk about. So I will always also refer to Konstantin's talk. So the knowledge graph for neuroscience, the eBrain's knowledge graph, I've already talked about a lot. So this is kind of the architecture, this is kind of computer stuff. I don't go into details. So this is a different, this is a really complex architecture based on the blue-brain nexus architecture, and we have different editors. So this goes back to the question of how can we add information to the knowledge graph. So there must be kind of an interface between the data storage, the knowledge graph, and the user. So there are APIs, user interfaces that can like add new data and change rules and formula, formalization methods. If there's a new data set needed that has no annotation yet, or there are no formalized rules, you can add them. And yeah, and this is a complex architecture to make real data sets accessible from the knowledge graph. Here, for example, there are receptor density distributions across the brain that are like acquired with receptor autoradiography methods. And you see, you have the eBrain's knowledge graph, and you have different brain areas, and each brain area has a different receptor density distribution. And in order to find those density distributions, for example, the hippocampus or something like that, you would need kind of a concept of hippocampus and concept of the modality you're interested in. Otherwise, you can also use this in a string search, but it gets more unified, and your data gets really greatly accessible through a careful metadata annotation. Otherwise, you won't find the data. So you could do this with the eBrain's knowledge graph graphic user interface. There you have like those classes of species you can filter, for example, and therefore you need a careful annotation your dataset with the class species, for example. And yeah, so and if you have an ontology or knowledge about how those species are related, then you could also see, look for specific classes of species, for example. All right, so in order to access the data, so this is another point from the knowledge graph, you need like kind of interfaces. And for the eBrain's knowledge graph, we have a really cool software tool developed by the Jülich Institute, and this is called Zebra. And there we have those semantic concepts you can retrieve. So concepts about brain atlases, reference spaces, brain parcellations. So we have an ontology basically of brain areas and geometric information. Then we can link that to the spatial concepts of brain geometry and link directly specific parts of the brain to datasets. So if you're interested in the hippocampus, then you can directly access through the semantic media layer all the datasets that are annotated with the anatomical representation, the semantic representation of the hippocampus, which is in turn annotated with geometric location in 3D space in the brain. Therefore, we can project the data onto different template spaces, for example, in MNI space or the FS average brain, and or we can retrieve it in those spaces. Okay, we have concrete data, you name it, like brain maps of parcellations, cortical layers, receptor density distributions, white matter tracts, gene data, IEG data, connectivity data. So everything is then interlinked with those concepts of brain areas or spatial definitions. And then you can select semantically, like the species you're interested in, human in this case. You can select the postulation, which is the unit postulation, and you can get the features that are annotated with the modality receptor distribution. In order to accomplish that, you need kind of a formalized set of rules that receptor distribution is a modality that can be accessed from the eBrain's knowledge graph. And then you can get directly the data out of it. So same goes for gene expressions, and here you can also imagine that it would be super beneficial if those genes then are annotated with the correct nomenclature used in the Hugo gene nomenclature. Then you can, for example, directly combine or compare or integrate the knowledge you can retrieve from the eBrain's knowledge graph with pathway or specific information and information about biological processes from the gene ontology. And you can use the gene ontology tools if you have a unified conceptualization of the data of interest. And then you can integrate all those different types and qualities of knowledge into your own project, into your own model of the brain. So this was a lot. If there are any questions right here, we can talk about what are databases, ontologies, knowledge graphs, semantic metadata. If nobody's asking questions, I will suppose that everybody knows now what all those things are, how they can be used, and what the difference are between those. Otherwise, I think this talk will also be on YouTube and you can just rewatch it. All right, so what time is it actually? So we have like 20 minutes or something about knowledge-based modeling, integrating biological knowledge into brain network models. I'm really sorry, but as I said, you will hear more about this and you already have heard about that. So what is the difference between a mechanistic model and a phenomenological model? I won't read that, so you can read it by your own, but it's about biological processes in the mechanistic model, and you can measure those concepts independently of the model. In phenomenological models, the relationship seeks only to best describe the data, and you cannot measure it independently of the data set. So the question is which one extrapolates better onto new data, or which explains your research questions better. So in summary, the mechanistic model is a more realistic approach, which tries to seek biological plausibility with the notion of validity to integrate this expert knowledge. So we can also say it's kind of a knowledge-driven model, or a mechanistic cause and effect model, basically, if you want to talk about biological pathways. The phenomenological model is rather a pragmatic approach, which is also needed for a simplification to reproduce behavior or to fit your data. And it enables prediction and generalizability. And this could be also a data-driven approach. But to say so, a computational model is always both, and you can't say that it's uniquely mechanistic or phenomenological. So you need kind of data for your model to validate it, or you need kind of a notion about the connections or the relationship between the parameters of your model, which is based on prior experiences, so which is based on knowledge. So it is a spectrum, but there could be rather more mechanistic or rather more phenomenological models. So how this is then done, I will just quickly go over that. For example, in this publication from Kahn and colleagues, the integrated knowledge in brain models of structural change in Alzheimer's disease. In particular, knowledge about receptor interactions. And so they retrieved generalized models of receptor density data, which I showed you early from the E-Weights knowledge graph. So you could basically just go for the concept of receptor densities, go type it into the eBrain's knowledge graph search engine, and get the knowledge about the different spatial distribution of receptors across the brain. And they compared it with individual maps of patients from the ADNI database to explain structural changes of Alzheimer's disease patients compared to healthy aging subjects. And they found out that a model that uses like generalized knowledge about receptor densities that can be in interaction with the imaging data from an individual explains the structural changes of the individual better than a model that is just based on individual imaging data. That could be a reason because the imaging data is rather like raw, but there could be also the possibility that there are systematic parameters inherently present in the individual image that can be only explained by using knowledge of general distribution of different receptor types. And using that knowledge makes the model then better explaining the structural changes of those individuals than just using individual data. So this is pretty cool, but this is just a static model, basically. But we could also take a look at brain dynamics, how information about regional heterogeneity of different aspects of the brain impact the activity. So there's a really cool study by Deco and colleagues, which assessed how the regional heterogeneity of different brain modalities can have an impact on the dynamical consequences. So they came across that it likely influences the local ratio of excitatory to inhibitory cell activity in dynamic brain models, in all brain models. And we have then a variable excitation inhibition balance across different brain regions. So the knowledge about different forms of cellular, molecular, and anatomical variability across the brain areas provide means for imposing local variations in brain network models, and help to understand the dynamical effects of different forms of regional heterogeneity. So we could use information, and they did also use different modalities and also gene maps to test the heterogeneity and how this affects models of brain activity. And this knowledge of spatial distribution patterns is really interesting also for integrating this into the virtual brain. So we have a brain network model, you also heard a lot about that, which integrates different qualities of data. So we have an individualized brain scan, and we can fit electroencephalo EEG data or functional magnetic resonance imaging data to a model that is based on an individual structural connection. And we can also inject or introduce heterogeneity of different aspects we want to model based on our biological knowledge we have. So we can, for example, model the effect of different biological pathways, or model the effect of different disease-specific parts, or we can access data via knowledge graph that can we then integrate into the individual brain model. But we also always need information about the spatial distribution across the brain, because if we just like impute a homogeneous brain map, then we totally ignore structural functional relationships. We totally ignore network effects of different brain areas. We just say, okay, the whole brain is more excitable or less excitable. Basically, if we go with the argumentation of Deco that there's an excitation inhibition balance, probably affected with maps of the brain of different modalities. So we need anatomical knowledge of diseases, pathways, or other data, and then we can build a biological plausible or better fitting model with TVB. So this is what we did for the Alzheimer or neurodegenerative disease knowledge graph, NeuroMSIG, I already showed to you. We have this complex information about molecular and biological pathways that are involved in the disease phenotype of Alzheimer's disease. But if we want to use this information for individual brain models, we need knowledge about where in the brain do those biological pathways happen. So what parts of the brain are affected? Therefore, we built the software tool, the virtual brain adapter of semantics, to do exactly this, to retrieve knowledge from those knowledge graphs, from those databases, to access the semantic meta layer and to transform this knowledge into a way to be integrated in brain network models. And this is basically an agent that is then unifying knowledge and transform it to be interoperable with other software tools like TVB. So we input information about Uberon, the anatomical ontology, and we linked all the anatomical classes from that are describing the brain to a brain parcellation in 3D space. And we also access the semantic knowledge stored in the mesh ontology, in HCNC, in the gene ontology, and also we are accessing a really well curated database of annotated literature, which is entailing all the PubMed literature and about 32 million articles, which are all annotated with an entity recognition algorithm to extract the information that is preserved in the literature. With TVBase, we now combine all those semantic layers to build semantic brain maps of different biological concepts, which can be also seen as a kind of semantic meta-analysis that is based on text mining scientific literature and associating the different biomedical concepts with the Uberon ontology and linking those terms then to the 3D space of the brain. Therefore, we can then directly project the semantic data to a template brain or even to an individual parcellated brain. And that can be then used with TVB. We're also currently building a GUI for the TV-based search engine, and also an app for just educational or lookup purposes when you want to know where in the brain a specific biological process or concept is referenced in the scientific literature corpus of PubMed. So this knowledge retrieval tool we're using is SkyView, which is a knowledge discovery tool and semantics literature search engine, basically, which integrates ontologies and structured databases with huge document collections and links those different sources at each documents via entity recognition and normalization of concepts with each other. So it extracts from all the documents the concepts and linking it with each other inside a document. So this is then a really sophisticated text mining approach based on natural language processing and entity recognition. Okay, so this interface of Skyview looks like this. So you can look for a specific concept defined in an ontology, in this case, the mesh ontology, and you find like hundred thousands of documents that are listing Alzheimer's disease or are annotated with the term Alzheimer's disease. And if you're looking for mesh, you won't even need a document that is directly stating Alzheimer's disease. It can be also kind of in the metadata of the document be linked to the concept with keywords or something like that. So it will pop up here as well. Ooh, sorry. What we're then doing is we have a precise anatomical representation of Uberon terms in 3D space. This is basically the core of TV base, that we can link the semantic layer back to the brain space the literature originally is talking about. So we have entity recognition and a statistical evaluation of how relevant a specific term is for a biometric concept. So we can extract statistics about how relevant a specific anatomical term is for example, the concept BDNF or Alzheimer's disease. This in Skyview is still in semantic space. We get then maybe the anatomical term hippocampus with a certain relevance, which is based on information entropy measures, like the Kullback-Leibler divergence. And so we get a statistical assessment of how great the association strength between a biomedical concept and an anatomical term defined in the Uberon ontology is. But what TVBase is then doing is linking this Uberon term with its statistical information to voxels in 3D space of a template brain in MNI space, for example. So we provide several tools for projecting semantic data in any way that is linked to Uberon terms, to anatomical terms. We could also project like directly raw expression data, gene expression data, and all possible data stored in a knowledge graph that is linked to a Uberon term. We can project with TVBase to voxels in the MNI space with a precise anatomical representation in 3D space. And we provide there for several tools for further processing this kind of heterogeneous brain map we can then build and overlay to the individual imaging data we acquired for individualized brain modeling. So this is done with this mapping of the ontological representation of anatomical classes to voxels in 3D template space. And we did this with a rather fine-grained parcellation scheme of the Human Connectome project by Glasser 2016. And we have then therefore built a framework directly projecting data associated with Uberon terms to those template brains in MNI 6th generation, in MNI 2009 space, even in FS average surface triangulations, or in the original SIFTI framework from the Human Connectome project. This is done by a precise and really, to be honest, tedious, detailed anatomical documentation of all the Uberon terms, nearly 1,000 different Uberon terms representing brain anatomy to areas of the Glasser parcellation. And we've written a really extensive manual for this anatomical assignment. For example, here, the Brodmann area 18 and 19 are the extrastriatal cortex and are assigned to those specific areas of the Glasser parcellation based on the original publication of Brodmann from 1909. So this is then how an example brain map looks like of the term frontal temporal dementia. So you can look for the concept defined in mesh frontal temporal dementia, and you get a brain image in MNI space. So you get a 3D nifty image, basically, in MNI space that is projecting the relevance of different anatomical areas according to the search term frontotemporal dementia onto the temporal brain. We can also then access all the publication our knowledge base is linked to. So our results are linked to the publications inside the SkyView knowledge base, this way around. And we can then access all the different brain areas and show the evidence, especially for those brain areas. And that's all possible because we have an interlinked and complex network of concepts that are annotated in each step of the data processing. So we can link back to original publications, we can link to different brain areas, and then search specific publications from there because they are all annotated with the original search term we're looking for. And then we can calculate complex statistics of the most relevant brains according to our biomedical concept we're looking for. So this is done in a Python package. It's just a video to show how this is then realized in a pretty straightforward fashion. So we formalize this this Python package, and we can then look for a concept with an autocomplete function. So we don't even have to look it up in the original ontologies. You can say just autocomplete our context we're looking for, and then we get the identifiers of the concept back. So we're not looking for the individual free text string anymore. We're looking for the concept with all the synonyms and the precise definition of the concept, in this case, Alzheimer's disease. And then we can retrieve all the articles that are linked and calculate the relevant statistics and plot the brain here. And there you can see it's based on like 70,677 articles, and has like the hippocampus is the medial temporal lobe as the most relevant areas for Alzheimer's disease. Okay, so we have this Python package, and because of the semantic linkage, we can then associate biological pathways to the search concepts we're looking for. So we can associate pathways to the brain areas that are displayed and associated with a search term. We can combine search terms, and we can even get the protein-protein interaction network from the genes associated with our search term. So because everything is interlinked and conceptually defined in ontologies, we can like access different knowledge graphs like the gene ontology or the string network, which is an exhaustive knowledge graph about protein-protein interactions, and associated with our search terms and different brain areas we are interested in. All right, I think I will jump this and just go to the outlook. We have like knowledge from literature and biological pathways that we can access with SkyView, for example, or Go, and the precisely annotated empirical data stored with eBrains. And we can use this with an interface that is linking these concepts with parameters of the virtual brain of brain network models with the mathematics to introduce heterogeneity into our brain models based on specific concepts we are interested in. So, and this is done using the virtual brain ontology, which is just linking the mathematical parameters with concepts like inhibitory postsynaptic potentials or synaptic transmission and biological surrogates. For example, serotonin receptors, which are directly linked to parameters of brain network models. And those receptor density data we can also directly access from the eBrain Knowledge Graph because it's annotated. So this was quite quick, and this you already seen. So I will just quickly jump to the scope of all this. So we want to use knowledge to build models for translational research, and this is a slide I've stolen from Leon Stefanowski. So we're using knowledge technology to build pathway-specific and anatomically heterogeneous models of the brain to input it into the complex dynamic system of brain network models to derive clinical interventions that can be used then in translationally. And that's kind of the outlook to build more biological plausible brain networks models based on knowledge-based systems. Okay, with that, I'm like completely on point. I'm super sorry. Hopefully you will give me 5 more minutes for questions or discussions. So here are my references, and I will just quickly say thank you for all the team, and we obviously worked together with to build this T-based software and TB ontology. All right, so I'll say thank you and like give you like 5 to 10 minutes for questions or discussions if you want to. So thanks.